He found my college sex tape I thought no one would ever see. Now he won't even hug me. I feel awful. Hello, Reddits. To avoid trolling, every name used here will be fake, including mine. So my name is Stella, and I'm here to I don't know, to be honest. I came here thinking maybe it could work, that maybe I may be able to get some sort of advice or something. Or maybe not. I may have destroyed things beyond redemption, and my life feels really awful. My husband Eric found something really incriminating, and now he won't talk to me or even touch me anymore. He found my college sex tape that I thought no one would ever see, and now he won't even hug me, and I feel so awful. I know. Who keeps a sex tape these days? But it was something stupid, something I had done and didn't think anything of it afterwards. I didn't know it could turn out like this or that Eric will ever find out. Now everything's just totally messed up. I met Eric 3 years ago, and everything between us was really fast-paced. We got married barely 3 months after meeting, and now we've been married for about 2.5 years. The fact that Eric wouldn't even touch me is very devastating. Eric used to be a very touchy person. He expresses his emotions by touching. I loved it so much, so I never complained. I loved how he always needed to touch me every minute we're together. It made me feel needed and wanted. I used to even joke about his need for physical contact all the time, and Eric would only laugh. It made our marriage even more beautiful. So it just feels really surreal that Eric wouldn't even touch me anymore. It's really painful. Before I met Eric, my life was a big dose of everything bad and wrong. I did everything that was considered both morally and legally wrong, and that was because I hung out with the bad crew. I almost couldn't graduate, and wouldn't even have if my parents didn't know the right people. My ex-boyfriend, whom I dated before I met Eric, had been the one to introduce me into that life. Steve and his friends were wild party animals, and we were always doing stupid things together. Things that at that time was something I thought was what living entailed. So I did everything with him. We dated for a year before we broke up. Actually, before my parents found out about my activities in school and broke us apart. They threatened to disown me if I continued the relationship. And there was also the fact that I literally had no grades, and I almost couldn't graduate. But the 1 year I spent with Steve was just really wild. He taught me everything I know about sex right now, and he was always partying, and that meant he dragged me along to each party. Steve had literally been my first boyfriend before I met Eric, so it was easy for him to convince me to do the things I did. And I also went along with everything willingly, because I was in love with him, and I wanted to please him. It didn't matter to me that Steve slept with other girls on the side. In fact, on days we went partying, he would disappear, leaving me with his friends, and come back some 30 or 40 minutes later with his lips a different shade of lipstick. But I ignored all that. All that mattered to me was that I was the one he was being seen with. I was the main girl, so I turned a blind eye to his cheating. That particular sex tape that Eric found had been one of those days. Steve had one of his wild ideas again. I was traveling home for the holidays, and he told me he wanted something he could use to remember me, and his idea had been to make a sex tape of us so he could watch it anytime he missed me. Stupid me was glad that he wanted something to remember me, so I agreed blindly to it. I agreed and watched him set up the camera before joining me in bed. We had sex that day, very much aware of the camera recording us. We had even watched it together a day after we recorded it, and it was fun. It was exciting to have something like that. Steve had promised me that he would get rid of the tape once I was back to school, so I wasn't frightened that anyone was going to see it. Besides, his face was also obvious in the video, even though it was a bit blurry because of the way he had set the camera up. But I still thought that Steve loved me enough not to expose the video to anyone. When my parents got a call from school because of their influence there, and they were told about my grades, I was still home, so they were able to make their threats well known. They had in fact promised to find something incriminating about Steve so they could put him in jail. And knowing Steve, it wouldn't take long for my parents to find something about him. So I promised them I wouldn't see him anymore, and they made me send a text to tell Steve that I was done with the relationship. Steve never replied. In fact, he literally ignored my message. My plans were to go back to school and try and make him understand that we could continue seeing each other in secret because of my parents, but I got back to school and got the shock of my life. Apparently, Steve had managed to edit the video, and his face that was a bit blurry, but was still obvious, had been completely blurred out. It Looked like I was having sex with a random guy like a whore and not my boyfriend. And then he proceeded to show his friends, who started passing comments and asking stupid things like if I wanted a repeat of the video, I could tell them any time or how it felt to have been slept with thoroughly like that. I felt so embarrassed, and I just left his room, which I had gone to immediately. I came back from home to explain things to him. I felt really disappointed and unhappy. It felt like everyone knew about it, and I kept looking over my shoulder each day, hoping that someone wasn't whispering and pointing fingers at me, identifying me as that girl. I eventually asked my parents if I could get transferred out, and they had managed to pull their weight and made something work. They didn't know the real reason for me wanting to leave. They were just happy that I was finally thinking straight. I focused on my studies in the new place and environment, and I barely made any friends. It was a year after graduation that I met Eric. Eric, who worked with my father on a business deal, had been invited by my parents for dinner. It was obvious that they were trying to matchmake us together, but they didn't need to work too hard because Eric and I liked each other instantly. Like I said before, we dated for only 3 months before we got married, and it pleased my parents greatly. No one talked about my past. It was all forgotten. I never told Eric about it either. I didn't want him to stop seeing me as the innocent and amazing person he saw me as, even though I was far from it. I just wanted him to continue seeing me as his beautiful wife who didn't have any past or blemish. Even though Eric had told me his past, weeks into our relationship, he told me about his possessive ex and how even though he was in love with her, he had to let her go because she was going about trying to destroy his relationship with other people, including business associates. When he asked me about mine, I only told him I had one boyfriend and we ended things because of the long distance. I didn't tell him anything other than that, and Eric had of course believed me. Our happy bubble finally shattered when I saw him again. Steve. I never knew he knew Eric, or that he was Eric's cousin, but I found out shockingly that day on Eric's mom's birthday when the whole family had gathered. I had met Steve's mom before, and they had always joked about their Steve, who was a prodigal child, but I never thought it was the Steve I knew. I never even paid much attention whenever they spoke about him, and for some weird reason, even though he never did, he decided to show up for this party, shocking everyone and pleasing his mother and Eric's mom. I pretended I didn't know him when Eric introduced us together, and Steve had surprisingly played along. I was so scared and could barely breathe properly throughout the party, and halfway through, when Eric's mom had cut her cake, I lied to Eric that I felt really sick and asked him to take me home. It wasn't a total lie. I did feel sick, but it wasn't physical. It was emotional sickness, and I had to get away from Steve's seething gaze, which he refused to lift after Eric had introduced us. I thought I didn't have to see him again after that. His mom already said he came and went as he pleaded, and I prayed for this time to be the same, but luck was definitely not on my side. Because 2 days after that party, I got a call from a strange number. I ignored it at first, thinking it was a spam call, but then a text popped up on my phone. It was Steve. He told me he wanted to see me, and he knew I didn't tell Eric about us. I was so scared, and I called the number back. Steve had told me to save his number and that he wanted to meet me for lunch near my workplace. I agreed with the intention of going to plead with him not to ruin my marriage. But I met a different thing entirely. Steve was being jovial as if he wasn't the one who blackmailed me into meeting him some hours ago. He apologized for blackmailing me, told me that was the only way he could think of to bring me out. He also apologized for showing his friends the video. He told me he didn't do it deliberately, that his friends had been curious when they saw the tape and had watched it without his permission. He told me that after I left, he got rid of the video, and that he didn't have it anymore. He had only come to make peace with me and nothing else. I relaxed foolishly, happy that Steve had changed for the better, so when he asked if we could be friends, I agreed without thinking. I didn't know that being friends actually entailed some things that were definitely not things that friends would do, but I had no thoughts. Or maybe I was just too blinded to see the consequences of my actions, even though they were right in front of me. Steve and I became friends quite all right. Friends that went out on lunch dates every day without Eric knowing. I couldn't tell Eric that I was friends with Steve, so I kept that information to myself. Usually, Eric was always the one picking me up for lunch at my workplace whenever he had work nearby, but I started, giving excuses so I could spend that time with Steve. I felt like I was doing that to compensate for the fact that he had changed and that he destroyed the tape. At least that was what I told myself at first, but eventually things graduated into something else entirely. Steve had invited me for the first time to his home, and I agreed to show up. It was a weekend and Eric was out of town for work. Not his, but my father's. So I was home all alone when Steve had texted me, wanting to know what I was doing, and I answered sincerely. When he invited me over for lunch, I agreed. It wasn't a big deal. It was just lunch like every other day, only this time it was at his apartment. So I went there following the address he gave me, but something entirely different from lunch had ended up happening. That day, we didn't even get to eat lunch. It had been an excuse to just get down and dirty. Steve had asked me to help him out in the kitchen. He was trying to make some eggs, but he was burning them badly and was wasting them. So I agreed and was helping fry the eggs. Somehow, our playful banter turned quickly into something else entirely, and Steve was telling me how much he had missed me and how hard it was for him seeing me married after trying hard to look for me over the years. I shouldn't have believed him, but I did, and he must have noticed how soft I had become because he kissed me. And when he did, instead of pushing him away, I found myself leaning into him and kissing him back. Steve managed to turn off the heat of the stove on the half-done eggs while kissing me and stripping me of my dress. Before long, we were both naked and having sex right there in his living room, as we couldn't even make it to his bedroom. It was only when we finished that it dawned on me just what I had done. I said nothing as I picked my clothes from the places we had flung them in our desperate attempts to get naked. Steve said nothing too, just laid there on his couch and watched me. I left their house, and I said nothing to Steve for 2 days after that. I was trying to process how I felt and the guilt that came with it. It didn't help seeing Eric try so hard to please me even more for those 2 days. He was cooking me dinner, giving me a massage without me asking. He was even buying me gifts. Although he did all of those things before, Eric just happened to do them more on those days, and it just hurt to pretend that I hadn't just ruined our relationship and trust without him knowing. So I made up my mind never to see Steve again, even as a friend. I didn't want to destroy the perfect thing I had with Eric, so I ignored him totally. But then Steve wouldn't let things be. He came to seek me out at my workplace when I wouldn't reply to his texts. When I managed to get him out of the office without causing a scene, he demanded that I tell him why I was ignoring him. He told me he loved me and that he didn't care that I was married. He said he wanted me, and I should be glad he was settling for just sex between us instead of trying to ruin things between Eric and I so he could have me all to himself. It was a lie, I knew that, but somehow I wanted to believe desperately that Steve had actually loved me through the course of our relationship. I didn't want to believe that I was the only one who fell in love, because it would have been horrible to accept that. So I chose to believe him, and I promised to visit him just to get him to leave. And Steve left only after I gave him a date and time that I would visit him. Visiting him again for the second time was the start of our full-bloom affair. Steve had been my first, like I said before, and he just knew all the things to do to turn me on, and also to make me have powerful orgasms. He was like that red button that when pushed could set off a dangerous alarm. I knew what I was doing was terrible and dangerous, but crazily that seemed to make it even more exciting. And Steve, already used to playing dangerous games, saw my marriage as a challenge. When I told him Eric and I had sex, he proceeded to have sex with me in a very different and possessive way, which made it even more fun. So most times, even when Eric and I didn't have anything, I still said things like that, describing how it had been between us, and it only seemed to increase Steve's sex drive. I thought I was playing it safe. I used a birth control pill secretly. I never had to use one before with Eric. We had planned that we were ready for kids anytime they came, but unfortunately they haven't until now. But I didn't want to take risks, especially with Steve, who seemed to hit all the right angles and refused to use a condom because, according to him, it didn't make it real. But then again, life would catch up with you in the most shocking and unexpected way, and believe me, it had. It was all totally and absolutely my mistake. That day, I decided to spend the night at Steve's place. Eric was out on a work trip as usual, and I didn't have work the next day, so I was free. Steve was more than willing to oblige when I asked if I could spend the night, and then he had collapsed exhausted after a round of sex that evening, but I couldn't sleep. So I took my bath and was trying to rub off the water when I heard Steve's phone beeped. I shouldn't have checked it, but curiosity got the best of me, and I reached for his phone, which was quite easy because of how heavily Steve usually slept. I used to tease him that he could get killed in his sleep because of how difficult it always was to wake him up when he did sleep. I knew his password. He had told me a week ago when both his hands were busy, and he needed some information on his phone about something really urgent. So he told me the password and asked me to help him with it. I didn't forget the password, and luckily, he never changed it after then, probably because he forgot, or maybe because I never checked his phone before, even while we were dating in the past. So I unlocked the phone, and when I went through it, I got the shock of my life. He had a group with his 2 other friends, those ones from university who had teased me about the video after they had seen it, and they were talking. In fact, the notification had popped up from the group chat where one was laughing and calling Steve a smart guy. I went through the chat only to discover that Steve had lied to me. He never destroyed the tape. He still had it, and he apparently hid it in his apartment. He was telling them how easy it was to convince me to give him free sex. He was happy that he got to have control over something his cousin Eric had. He spoke about me like an object that he needed to possess, just to spite his cousin. He told his friends that he was definitely going to show Eric the tape one day, and that was going to be the day he got tired of sleeping with me. I was so shocked and I couldn't believe it. I dropped off his phone and pretended like I hadn't seen it. The next morning before he woke up, I went out to buy strong sleeping medications, and I put them all in his tea, knowing he would probably wake up the next day in the evening with it. When he woke up, he was quite happy that I served him tea, and he drank everything only to fall asleep deeply after 10 minutes. I searched everywhere for the tape and eventually found it in his wardrobe, hidden carefully between his clothes. I arranged everything back the way I met them and left for home. My intention had been to burn it when I got home, but I was shocked to see Eric when I got home. I quickly lied about sleeping over at a friend's place when I got too drunk to come back home. Eric believed me and said nothing about it again. I quickly hid the tape in my wardrobe, hoping to burn it when Eric was out of the house. But that didn't happen anytime soon because he was on leave, and so he was always in the house. I couldn't exactly start burning something without raising his suspicion, so I left it for that week, and that had been my biggest mistake. I came home during my lunch break because of the sudden text I got from Eric to come home. He didn't sugarcoat it or even add the love emojis as he had always done whenever he texted me. He just texted in a blunt way, and I was honestly scared thinking something bad had happened. And it had, because immediately I got home, sitting in Eric's hand was the same tape that I wanted to get rid of. I started to shake, especially after seeing the look on Eric's face. He said nothing at first, just looked at me for a long time before finally asking me who it was in the video. I couldn't bring myself to lie, so I just told the truth. I told him about Steve. I told him about our past together and how the tape had come to be. I told him about meeting Steve again and how I obtained the video, skipping the part where I've been sleeping with him for the past 2 months. But Eric was smart enough to know that. He just stood up after I finished narrating my story, and he left the house. He didn't come back home until it was so late at night, and because I was waiting up for him, too anxious to go back to sleep, I knew the exact time he stepped into the house. He was drunk for the first time since I've known Eric. He was drunk, and when he staggered and I tried to reach for him, he pushed my hands off like there was venom in them. I felt really terrible, and when he finally made it upstairs to our room, he locked me out of the room. I cried so hard that night. I didn't know what to think or do. I kept regretting not burning that tape or ever getting involved with Steve again. The next day hadn't been any different. Eric, although sober, wouldn't let me near him. He didn't even take the coffee I gave him to cure his hangover. He just practically ignored me. And that has gone on for a week now. He barely sleeps at home or talks to me. He never picks my calls or replies to my texts when he's out, and when he's inside, he has moved my things out of the room, so he locks himself in and refuses to even eat anything I cook. It's getting so difficult getting by with Eric being this way. I cannot tell anyone because I don't want them knowing the horrible things I've done. And I'm so scared that when Eric would eventually come out of his silence, it would bring terrible results. I'm so scared and I really don't know what to do. Just how do you get a man who saw your video with your ex to forgive you? How do you get your husband who knows you've been cheating on him to look at you the same way again? I will give anything right now to get Eric to look at me and touch me the way he had always done before. I regret everything I did so much, and I wish there was some way to remedy this. Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been 3 weeks, 3 whole weeks since I first came here, to explain myself and perhaps in a way look for some sort of solution. It's been 4 weeks since Eric found out about my idiotic affair, and I can say my life is just not the same anymore. In fact, it has gotten so bad I'm barely hanging on. Everything in my life has fallen apart, especially my marriage. Eric finally reacted after a week of keeping silent, and it had been just horrible. Eric had called for a family gathering between both our families, and he never told me. He barely even spoke to me anyways. So I only got home to see the house beaming with people, both our families and even our friends. I was surprised and shocked and didn't know what to expect, especially when my mom told me that it had been Eric that called for the gathering. Eric, after noticing that I was home, started to address everyone. He ignored my pleading eyes not to expose me. He simply didn't even look at me at all. He stared at everyone except me. And then finally he had taken out that tape and inserted it into the disc player and played it for everyone to see. I could hear everyone gasping in shock as they watched me sleeping with a man whose face was blurred out completely. And then Steve had provided another evidence to prove who my lover was. It was a recorder this time, and when he played it, I knew I was doomed. It was the one of me confessing and telling him about Steve and how everything had happened. Eric was looking at me then, his eyes a shadow of what they used to be, warm and full of love. He was staring at me coldly, as if to tell me that I had laid my bed and I had to lie in it. He clearly wasn't going to cover my sins or forgive me for it, and that gathering had been an evidence of that. I kept crying. Everyone was speaking all at once, but I turned their voices out. I couldn't remove my eyes from Eric's cold ones. He finally dropped the last bomb when he told me that he sent that video to my workplace, and that everyone already knew that I was not only a liar, but a cheat. Cheating in my marriage couldn't exactly get me fired, but Eric knew that, and that's why he sent it to everyone there. He wanted to make my workplace unbearable for me, and the company not wanting to ruin their reputation would let me go. Eric knew that, and that's why he did it. He wanted to ruin me completely. He ended that gathering by handing me divorce papers and giving me 2 days to remove my things from his house. I knew I was doomed, and I kept crying. I vaguely remember hearing my father telling me never to come home again because he was disowning me, and I saw my mom agreeing with him before they both left. Eric's mom had looked at me in disgust, and she just kept talking down at me. She proceeded to go hire some guys to remove my luggage that very day. She didn't want me spending one more minute in her son's house. I just kept crying. I didn't know what to do or how to go about anything. It was only after I was kicked out that I realized just how much you have ended ruining my life. I had nowhere to go, no place to call home. My parents clearly didn't want to see me. My husband wants nothing to do with me, and I'm rejected by everybody, everyone I have ever known. I feel so devastated, and it's so horrible knowing that I did this to myself. I was the one who didn't think of the consequences of my actions before doing them. I was the one who didn't know to stop until I finally got myself in deep trouble. My life is nothing impressive anymore. I don't have a job or a home. The cold and emptiness of this small space that could easily pass out for a storage room makes my heart ache badly. It's so painful that I'm only receiving an eye-opener after the consequences of my actions are already on me. I regret everything so much, and I wish I could undo the past, but that's not possible anymore. I had my chance, and I lost it. I could have easily told Eric about Steve. We were a thing of the past, and there was really no need to fret. Maybe Eric wouldn't have liked it, but it happened way before I met him, so he could have accepted it, and he wouldn't react this way about the video. I should never have entertained Steve, especially after he came to me with a threat. I could have easily picked a lesson from what he did to me in the past, but I had instead blindly gone along with it. Steve was only a coward, and he ever will be, running immediately after. Hearing of the news that the family now had, he never even contacted me once after that. Didn't try to find out what became of me. He didn't care. He was a liar and a manipulator, and I had always known that, but yet I allowed him still manipulate me the way he had. He gave me nothing but took everything from me, including my present and my future. And I allowed it. I foolishly allowed it. It doesn't. Even help matters that I have no one to talk to. I have no one to tell my story to. No one cares enough to listen. No one wants to hear me out anymore. I lost that chance to be heard when I did the things I did, and out of my desperate attempt to try to get someone to hear me out, someone to reason with me, someone to tell me I messed up but things could still get good, I came here, but I got the direct opposite of everything I wanted. The insults and backlashing comments you guys left on my post has further driven me into depression. You guys have managed to slash my hopes and dreams when I came here, and you still didn't stop there. You went further into dissecting my heart into smaller pieces with your words. I feel dirty and ashamed of myself. I regret coming here, but then again here. I am still writing to the same set of people who want nothing to do with me, the same set of people who think I'm a horrible person and have made sure I realize it fully. But then, nothing beats loneliness. I've become so lonely, I craved anything to get my mind off the dark pit it is in now, even the insults from you guys. It's so stupid, but true. I've become so lonely I feel like I'm losing my mind, staring at my unpainted walls each day, remembering everything and regretting so deeply things I cannot even change. I keep remembering the look in Eric's eyes as he stared at me after watching that videotape. The way every love and adoration that used to flash in his eyes had been wiped away and replaced by anger and disgust. I remember that night when he had come home drunk, and even in his drunken state, he still managed to recognize the evil I have committed and pushed me away. It feels so awful remembering that I did that to us. I caused Eric, who couldn't go a day without me despite the years we've been together for, to be disgusted by me, and to the extent of wanting to ruin me and hurt me in more ways than one. I remember how he stared at me as he revealed my dirty secrets to everyone at that house. That look has haunted me since that day. I cannot stop remembering, and I cannot stop having nightmares about it. I've now not only become a laughingstock, but also an embarrassment. I'm not only an embarrassment to myself, but also to my parents. It's true what they say about not realizing the gift you had until you have lost it, because I only realized just how well I should have cherished Eric with all my life when I had the chance to do so. Now that I don't, I miss every single thing about him. The funny way he laughs, the way he always needed to touch me like I was his life's battery, the way he spoiled me silly with gifts even without any special occasions, the way he loved me like no other man ever had, the selfless way he had always treated me. I miss everything. And I regret thinking I could have ever traded that for something else. I know that things will never be the same. I will remain this way for life suffering and regretting the things I did to hurt Eric. I will always have to remember that I had a perfect life, and yet I ruined it with my own hands because of my greediness and selfishness. I will always be stuck with this irreversible pain lodged in at the center of my head and my heart, knowing that I made myself this way. I managed to turn myself from a loved wife with a perfect husband, a family that loves her, and good circle of friends, and also with a good paying job, to this version of me that I barely can put a name to. I don't know how to survive this. I don't know if I'm ever going to recover. Scratch that. I probably never will, because how do you recover from losing the most important person in your life because of your mistakes? Mistakes that could have been avoided. I know I should never have cheated on Eric with a coward like Steve. I know, and I regret that I thought I could get away with it if I did, but then life would really be unfair if I did. I wish I got a second chance to do things over. Then I will love and cherish him with all my heart. Then I will never have allowed Steve into my life or given him the chance to ruin my life again the way he had the first time. The thought of having to live the rest of my life this way is so scary, and I wish so desperately, despite knowing it can never happen, that I don't have to. But that's just wishful thinking. Sadly, I know that you guys probably don't want to hear anything from me again. I know that you guys hate me and don't care about me enough to listen to me rant. That's why this is my last post here. I had thought that writing here would somehow relieve the pain and guilt I feel, but it hasn't, and I know it probably never will. I hope you guys learned something or anything from me, regardless of how hateful you feel towards me. Goodbye, guys.